Now, this chapter covers system attacks. And while we will talk about other types of attacks later on in the chapter, network attacks, web application attacks, and so forth, this is very important because really, if you think about it, the ultimate goal of a hacker is to get to a system, to a host, and possibly the data that sits on that host. Now, system attacks target that host and the operating system level, so the OS that actually sits on the host. Although you could say that the ultimate target really is the user, simply because it's the user's credentials we want or the user's data possibly. Now, system attacks have the goal of getting access to the host, the box itself, and any files that sit on it. Now, this can be accomplished through a wide variety of means, but typically it's through a vulnerability that sits on the host that's attacked over the network or through authentication with credentials, meaning a username and a password in most cases. Now, once a hacker has host access, the next goal is to get elevated privileges so they can perform actions on the box, they can install software such as malware or whatever, and they can steal data. The goal of hacking, if you look at it, is to get data. It could also be to get credentials, privileged access to systems, or even deny authorized users access to those systems or data. Now, the system could include the host and the operating system, but you could also say that includes the application software that sits on it, any utilities and command that sit on it, and even the data that resides on it. You could also say that it includes the user, the wetware of the system, if you will. Now, specific goals of a hacker might include getting sensitive data, personal information on the user themselves, or even user credentials to access other sites or other systems, because let's face it, sometimes we as users use the same password to access multiple systems. We might even, as a hacker, have a goal of jumping from system to system, compromising one system so we can jump to another, and eventually compromising the entire network. Now, user credentials are typically the best way to get to a system, both remotely and physically. If we have an authorized username and password to get to the system, well, then that's probably the easiest way. It's probably the best way. Other ways involve attacking the system through vulnerabilities, maybe through exploits like buffer overflows or configuration issues, and those aren't always 100% effective. But a username and password for an authorized user on the system is effective. Now, once we get access to the system, maybe we don't have full access that we want. Maybe we have access of a normal user. And that's where privilege escalation comes in. We want privilege escalation so we can get full access to data and the system far beyond that of an ordinary user. We want to be able to change system settings, look at configuration files, jump to other network locations, file shares, and so forth. We want to be able to create our own user account so we can sneak back in later or install software on the box, maybe even malware, and sometimes that requires administrative access. And also, as a hacker, we may want to hide our tracks by destroying or altering audit trails, the event logs, for example. And typically, you can only do that if you're an administrator on a box or have root-level access to a box. Now, let's talk about some of the attack vectors and methods. And we're going to go through a lot of these throughout the rest of the course, and some of them apply specifically to a system. Some of them apply to the network or to applications. In any case, we'll cover these as we go through the entire course. Now, attack vectors can include password theft or interception, because if we can get passwords, we can get on the box. It also may include guest access. A lot of systems lock the guest account but don't provide a password for it. So if we could unlock it, then we have guest access. And in some cases, the guest is not even locked out. If we can get malware or spyware on the system, that could get us access or at least damage the computer and see what a user is doing. We also may target the operating system itself or any configuration weaknesses that are on the box to get access. Let's don't forget about social engineering. Users are the weakest link in a system typically, so social engineering users through email, internet, or even physical contact and talking to them might be a good attack vector for a system. And let's don't rule out physical access. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but physical access can be very important as well. Now, what are some of the methods to attack a system? Well, if we can get password hashes, we can do password cracking, and we'll explain how that works in over a few sessions coming up. We can install keystroke loggers and monitoring software so we can see what the user is doing and how they're doing it and possibly getting information about them and their credentials. We can scan systems to determine the vulnerabilities that are on them so we can research them and take advantage of those vulnerabilities and possibly come up with exploits to exploit them. We can use hacker tools on the box, obviously, or against it over the network. We can also, if we have physical access, steal the system or physically interact with it to change security features, to lower them, if you will, so that we can get access to it later. So these are some of the attack vectors and methods for system attacks, and obviously there's several out there, probably a lot more than I mentioned, and never underestimate the creativity of a hacker. A hacker may chain several vulnerabilities together to get access to the system, vulnerabilities that may seem small at first, but once you put them together, they can get a system in the hands of a hacker, either over the network or even physically in some cases. So there's many different vectors and methods out there, and we're going to cover some of these throughout this chapter and through the remaining chapters of the course.